Hey everybody, welcome in. I'm Joey Browning. Welcome to tonight's show. It is Wednesday, January 7th, 2026. We're on the eve of the first college football playoff semifinal game, the Fiesta Bowl, tomorrow night between Ole Miss and Miami. And then we're about 48 hours out from the Peach Bowl in Atlanta between Oregon and Indiana, a rematch from the regular season of Big Ten foes. Guys, welcome in wherever you are, wherever you may be listening, however you may be watching. Thank y'all for being here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button on YouTube. Subscribe and follow us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you follow us on Twitter at Joey Browning CFP. And follow us on TikTok at Joey Browning CFP. Guys, as the show has kind of got kicked off here over the last week and a half or so, we've really tried to, push out as much content on those social media accounts as we can on Twitter and TikTok. And that's really the basis of the X's and O's portion of our program. And so we are a college football show geared towards scheme, X's and O's. And for anybody that wants to learn and see more about those X's and O's, that's really what the show's about. And so the nuts and bolts of everything is going to be in those social posts on Twitter and TikTok. So, guys, make sure you're following us there. I had some good interaction there so far, and everything video-wise will always be posted to our YouTube as well, so you can't miss anything there as long as you're subscribed to us. And on that note, we will be going, as a program alert, we will be going live as soon as the Fiesta Bowl is over tomorrow night on YouTube, right here on our channel. We'll do a kind of an instant reaction to what we just saw between Ole Miss and Miami. And then on Friday night, right after the Peach Bowl is over, we will go live as well with another instant reaction after the game between Oregon and Indiana. So once again, make sure you're subscribed. As long as you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification as soon as we go live. And then you'll be able to join us there. And all the audio from that will also be posted to our podcast feed. And so anywhere you get your podcast, you'll also be able to hear that in audio form. So, guys, enough about the housekeeping stuff. We're going to go ahead and get into tonight's deal. Our open tonight, before we get to the semifinals, before we get to the preview of that, we are going to kind of look at and talk about how college football has flipped and how this Final Four is a perfect representation of how the mode that national champions and powers within this sport have been flipped on their head in this era. Not just NIL, but the transfer portal as a team building method. So, come with me on this little journey through college football in recent memory. It's been 29 years since we had a first-time college football national champion crown. You people out there, not too quick with the math, Florida Gators in 1996. So in the 1997 Sugar Bowl, they beat Florida State 52-20, and they were crowned national champions. The first time Florida had won a national championship, and that's the last time we had a new national champion. We have about a 2 and 3 chance right now of on January 19th when the confetti falls, the trophy's given out on that stage in Miami. We have about a 2 and 3 chance of having a new first-time national champion, which, of course, will be Oregon or Indiana. Miami, of course, claims 5 national championships, all since 1984. Ole Miss actually has a national championship they claim back from 1962, but it would be a long time coming for Ole Miss, obviously, as well. But as you can see, we have a lot of new blood in this Final Four. Okay? Doesn't matter the seeding, doesn't matter the conference. 3 conferences represented. It really doesn't matter the pedigree of the coaches involved. It doesn't matter the, eliteness of the recruiting. It doesn't matter the spending budgets, the facilities. None of that really correlates to what we're seeing with these four teams. And it's not just these four teams, it's what has happened in college football as a whole and kind of how the distribution of talent and how talent is distributed throughout the sport has leveled the playing field to allow programs like in Indiana, who is the second all-time losingest FBS program, to make it to the college football playoff. It speaks to an ever-evolving landscape of college football that I don't think there's enough conversation about. I think there's a ton of conversation about what's wrong with the transfer portal. How do we fix NIL? How do we fix the calendar? We need a commissioner. I don't think there's enough conversation about how the sport has been leveled out. And you've done away with this dynastic sort of era of the sport. And when I say that, we're going to talk about that here in just a second in detail of when and who that applies to, that dynastic era of college football. So think about this. In our Final Four, Indiana is currently a plus 130 favorite to win the national championship. The University of Indiana Hoosiers, football, not basketball, football. They are a plus 130 favorite. Much has been said, more than we can say here tonight to make any difference about what Kurt Cignetti's done at Indiana since he's got there. Indiana is on top of the sport at the moment, and they're the favorite to win it all. Oregon is considered the blue blood in this Final Four. Think about that. Oregon, the Phil Knightness, the Nike-ness, the Pacific Northwestness, all the chartreuse and dark green and chrome metallic uniforms you can imagine. Okay? Oregon, who, it's a proud program, and there's nothing to, to kind of be ashamed of in their history. Oregon football really, in its modern era since 2007, since Chip Kelly came on campus as the OC, that's really, from 2007 to present, really Oregon's relevance at the national landscape. But despite playing in 2 national championship games, they're the farthest thing from a blue blood you can imagine, right? They're not an Alabama, a USC, a Michigan, a Notre Dame, right? They're the farthest thing from that. And then you look at Ole Miss, who's got the best remaining offense in this tournament, okay? Number 2, according to Bill Connelly's S&P Plus, which we're going to talk about that in that matchup in a little bit. That model really, really, really likes Ole Miss. Miami, who has the best defensive front remaining. And it might not just be the best one remaining. If you still had all 130-something FBS teams in there, I would wager that Miami is probably the best defensive front out of all those teams. They lead the nation in sacks, by the way. So you have such an eclectic mix of these 4 teams that all have a legitimate chance to win the national championship. And I don't think you could say that in any era, any year of this college football playoff era, you don't have that, okay? These Final Four teams read more like the Final Four in Omaha for the College World Series than they do in football. Think about this. In baseball, guys, the distribution of talent, okay, or should I say the opposite of that, the collection and the stockpiling of talent, it can be neutralized in baseball, right? Overall talent can be kind of matched and taken away its edge and balanced out by a pitching staff that gets hot, or part of a lineup that catches fire and just can't miss and starts hitting the ball like it's a beach ball, right? Those types of things happen in those sports. But in football, this is not supposed to happen, okay? In college football, the powers of the sport traditionally stockpile talent through elite recruiting class after elite recruiting class. And all that's done in order to, when they get on the field in the fall, is to overwhelm their opponents with wave after wave after wave of depth. Right? Think 2021 Georgia. right? Jordan Davis is up there. You've got Quay Walker. You've got Nakobe Dean. You've got Trayvon Walker. You've got all these guys. You've got Devontae White. And we don't even mention the likes of Jalen Carter, who might be the best interior defensive lineman in the NFL right now. He was on that team, right? Quay Walker was not even a starter on that 21 Georgia team and got drafted in the first round. Okay? That Georgia team is a perfect example of the stockpiling of talent where you have your ones are really good, but then your twos are really good. Right? That is how they built them. I mean, look at 2011 Alabama, right? Perhaps the best defense in the modern era of college football. They did the same thing on that D line up front, right? The twos were almost as good as the ones. They were interchangeable. Okay? And when that happens, when you look at the last 16 national champions of college football, 12 of those national championships were won by either Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson. They won 12 of those 16. Those schools have been the model of the high school elite recruiting model, right? Recruit as many blue chips as you can, as many 4 and 5 stars as you can. Get that blue chip ratio up where the blue chip ratio is how many, or what's the percentage of people in your program that are 4 or 5 star. Okay? That is the idea behind that, right? And the portal and NIL have flipped this not overnight, but very quickly in about 3 years. Okay? So if you look at this year's field of the college football playoff contenders, of all 12, if you look at their starts this year by high school recruits, and then you compare that to their starts by transfers, okay? So, for example, University of Georgia, they led all 12 teams in the field with 90% of their starts this year by kids they recruited out of high school, kids they signed out of high school. So 10% of their starts this year at Georgia were made by kids they got through transfers and through the portal, right? Ohio State was next with 72% of their starts coming from kids that they recruited straight out of high school, right? 28% in converse were by transfers. So you get the idea, right? Those are the teams that built through their high school recruiting and they supplement it with their transfers, okay? Now, flip that on its end. Once again, just these 12 teams we're talking about in the playoff field. The team with the lowest percentage of starts by high school recruits is Ole Miss, with 33% of their starts this year coming by kids they recruited out of high school, meaning 67% of their starts this year were made by kids that they signed through the transfer portal. Indiana, 34% of their starts were made by their high school recruits. 65% were made by transfers. So this is a completely different method of team building. They are building their teams through the portal, and they supplement with their high school recruiting classes. So if you think about it, guys, the portal has allowed for the distribution of talent to be spread across college football instead of this stockpiling happening because the portal is a constant yearly distributor, right? We're used to, you had these kids signed straight out of high school. They had a 4-year scholarship. They very rarely transferred, if ever. And you had people, that's how you get the 2021 Georgia team. That's how you get the 2011 Alabama team. That's how you get the 2019 LSU team. That's how you get the 2018 Clemson team. They stockpiled those recruiting classes year after year. If they missed on a recruit, guess what? If you miss on a 5-star defensive end, chances are in that same class you probably had another one. And in the next 2 or 3 classes, you definitely had a handful more, right? It wasn't as important to hit on kids specifically, right? So, switch to this new model. There's less risk involved in building through the transfer portal. It's much easier to hit on a portal transfer than it is to hit on a high school recruit, because the transfer is going to have more college film, right? Think about Fernando Mendoza, right? He has at least 2 years of film at Cal on tape for Indiana to see that, hey, he's the guy they want. Scouts had already identified him as a top draft pick in the 26th draft before he ever left the University of California, right? Look at a kid like a Trinidad Chambliss, who's on the other end of that spectrum, right? Going into this year, he transfers to Ole Miss just to earn a backup role. Nobody thought he was going to start over Austin Simmons. Austin Simmons is the starter. He's the guy until Simmons got hurt, right? But you saw Chambliss had out of Michigan, where he played high school ball. He had 0 FBS offers. He went to play at Fair State in Division II, and he got enough film over those 4 years there playing at Fair State that he jumped all the way from Division II to the Southeastern Conference. In the old model, a Trinidad Chambliss is never discovered because he's still playing at Fair State, because he's not transferring, he's not going in the portal and ending up at Ole Miss and playing on the national stage in the college football playoff. So you have that film that you can see on those guys, right? The portal neutralizes high school recruiting, right? You can tell what these guys are. You don't have to guess or project what they're going to be right out of high school. Programs like Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State have run this sport in recent years, the last decade and a half or so, because their method was stacking blue chip recruits. But it's a lot harder to win with the high school method now because you can't build that depth anymore, right? Georgia's not signing 8 or 9 defensive linemen in a class anymore, right? They're signing 4 because NIL is pulling those other 4 to other schools based on an NIL package that they're going to offer those kids, right? They're not all going to go to Georgia and just to play behind somebody else in their same class and get over-recruited in the next class. They're not going to do that. They're going to go somewhere else and play. So your depth is automatically cut by that. And if you miss on a couple of those recruits now, so now say at Georgia, you used to have, say in 2019, you signed 8 4- and 5-star defensive linemen, and say in 2025, you signed 4. Well, if you miss on 2 of those 4 and they wash out and never produce for you, then you're out an entire position group where you used to have a stockpile of recruits in that position group, right? So it's a lot harder to recover from missing on prospects. If you focus on building through the portal, though, your hit rate's higher because those kids are older and more experienced, right? Think about this. Indiana is playing, they're getting more reps in their 2 deep from 6th-year players than they are getting from underclassmen, from freshmen, sophomore, and juniors. So, and when I mean true freshmen, sophomore, and juniors, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd-year players, those kids are older. They're more mature. They're adults compared to the 18 and 19-year-olds that are playing at Georgia and Ohio State, who are still heavily built through high school recruiting. Okay? So you can build a team of older, more proven talents. You're probably going to beat the younger teams who are less of a sure thing in college. Okay? I want to talk real quick about how the blue chip ratio kind of relates to all this, right? So the blue chip ratio is this, it's a recruiting compilation of what is your percentage of your team that are 4- and 5-star recruits. Okay? So Georgia, 74% of their team going into 2025 was 4- and 5-star recruits. So that's their high school classes. That doesn't count transfers. Okay? Second was Alabama with 73%. Third, or tied for second, is Ohio State with 73%. Then you have LSU at 71, Oregon at 67, Texas at 65, and so on and so forth. Right? So those numbers, those percentages, that's the percentage of those teams of their high school recruits, the kids they signed out of high school, that are 4 or 5 stars. Indiana is 45th on that list. Okay? Indiana is 45th on that list with 8%. Their blue chip ratio is 8%. That's lower than teams like Iowa, Utah, UCLA, Missouri State, Georgia Tech, NC State, Illinois, SMU, Stanford, Minnesota. They're all ahead of Indiana in the blue chip ratio. However, when you go in and you recalculate that number and you calculate into the transfers that those schools have. So if you take the transfers they've gotten that are 4 and 5 stars coming out of high school, okay? So kids they sign out of the portal who, when they signed out of high school somewhere, they were 4 or 5 star. Indiana, and you re-rank them, right? You re-rank the teams based on that. Indiana's number 1 in their blue chip ratio. Ohio State's number 2. Notre Dame's number 3. Georgia's at 7. Alabama's at 8. Okay? So you get the idea. Those schools that are building through the portal, they can overcome this gigantic Grand Canyon that's between them and the Georgias, the Ohio States, and the Alabamas of the world by hitting on these older, more proven college players who have proven they can play in college and are not a hit or miss prospect. And so that is ultimately what's going on and has changed the landscape of college football. Now, I'm not here to argue that that's a good or a bad thing. Do I think it's a good thing that we have some new blood in this championship hunt? I do. I think it's very, very intriguing that Indiana and Ole Miss, Oregon, right? These are the schools that are playing for it all and have a chance to win it all. To me, it's speaks to the parity of college football and how indirectly the portal has changed things and NIL have changed things. Now, I will say I definitely believe that, I know that down the road, if there is not some guardrails placed on this whole deal in terms of some type of collective bargaining, some type of contract in place for the players, something to keep this thing going, the product's going to go off the rails, right? The entertainment product of college football is at an all-time high. The games are absolutely awesome, just like they've always been, right? But they are playing with fire, and I say they, in the college football power brokers are playing with fire because if the public who watches this and follows it, if it becomes too complicated and too off the wall and too wild, wild west to follow, that will bring about a fatigue factor for the consumer, right? It's already happened in college basketball, okay? Where you don't know who's playing for what team from year to year, and there's no interest in the characters that are actually playing the game, right? There's no connection to them. And so college football dares to kind of go off this cliff of disorganization and chaos if it doesn't put some rules in place that can be enforced, right? The rules in place now, but hey, nobody's really following it, right? You're only supposed to spend $20 million, according to, the new NIL clearinghouse, and you're only supposed to spend that on it's got to be a marketing thing. It can't be like direct pay for play, and you have, places like LSU and Texas Tech who are just breaking the bank way over that to get these players in, and it's it's the blind's leading the blind. Okay, the schools can fix it. They have the power to fix it. They just got to decide that they want to and that they're willing to change things. And there need to be massive changes, right? Not a complete overhaul of the sport and the way that it's governed, but there needs to be massive changes in order to fix this. So that's my rant about how college football has changed. And like I said, not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I think it's very good that these programs are competing and playing for the national championship and the playing field's level. I will say this: we have the most even, balanced Final Four that I can ever remember as a college football fan, where each and every one of these teams, even Ole Miss, who is plus 600, they're the longest shot right now of the four to win it all. There's easily scenarios where I can see Ole Miss winning this thing and winning these next 2 games. So, on that note, let's go ahead and talk about the Fiesta Bowl tomorrow night. So, tomorrow night, 7:30, ESPN in Glendale, Arizona, in the Fiesta Bowl. You have Miami, a 3.5-point favorite over Ole Miss. Miami's the 10 seed. Ole Miss is the 6 seed. Seed doesn't really matter at this point. Both these teams have won 2 games in the playoff already. And both these teams were, I would say, pretty sizable upsets in the last round, in the quarterfinal round. Ole Miss, depending on where you looked at the number, I think the close is a 6-point dog against Georgia. And then Miami was a 9.5-point underdog to Ohio State. Both these teams overcame a lot in terms of the perception to win those games. Guys, and I think by now, if you're an avid college football watcher and you have paid attention, you know these teams by now, right? Miami's pass rush and its run game. That is the engine that drives it. And they have played the perfect song in order to win these last 2 games with those same notes and that music, right? That music being and those notes being pass rush and their run game on offense, right? Reuben Bain Jr., Akeem Mesidor, those guys completely destroyed Ohio State's pass protection. Ohio State did run the ball some on Miami, but Miami shortened that game to a point that once they got up 14-0, Ohio State really could not afford to commit to running the ball a lot because their possessions became limited in that game, the way that Miami was playing it. And Miami controlled that game on offense and defense for the most part. The run game, Mark Fletcher Jr., he's gone off. He had 90 yards rushing against Ohio State. He had 175 against Texas A&M. As long as Miami can be physical up front and execute in the zone run game, they're getting those double teams up front. They're moving people. They are getting downhill. Fletcher is seeing it. Fletcher is very hard to tackle. He is the engine that runs their offense. And Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator at Miami, thought he had a great game plan against Ohio State in that they're just a lot of the same against Texas A&M. They're not going to ask Carson Beck to do a whole lot. What I mean by that, they're not going to ask him to win the game. They're not going to ask him to sit back there and drop back in 5- and 7-step drops and read full field progressions and throw the ball all over the place and avoid pressure and avoid turnovers. They're not asking him to do that. They're shortening the game. They're running the football. They're throwing high percentage passes underneath. So, quick game on 1st and 2nd down. They want to go from 1st and 10 to 2nd and 5. That's what Miami wants to do. High percentage passes, quick game. Throwing hitch concepts against free access. Throwing spacing concepts against zone, right? Throwing slants and outs against man coverage. Getting the ball out of his hands and executing. That's what Miami wants to do. They don't want him to stand back there and hold it, and where the pass rush gets to him, or he feels antsy and uncomfortable and he makes a mistake, right, and has a turnover. That's what Miami wants to do. They have executed that game plan to a T against A&M and against Ohio State, and it's helped their defense out, right? In the playoffs, Reuben Payne Jr. has 16 pressures in 2 games. 16. I thought the last game, putting, Bain and Mesidor on the same side and working a tackle and end stunt, I thought stuff like that was just, it really put a lot of pressure on Ohio State to try to protect against that on Julian Sayin, to try to get the ball out and find the right place to go. I thought all that stuff was great. I thought the way they blitzed their nickel and their pressures that Miami had were extremely timely and I thought they confused Julian Sayin a lot. And I really thought going into that game, Miami would try to limit explosives. They would try to keep the top on Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. They let it off one time, right? Ohio State went 12 personnel, hard play action on their first drive of the second quarter. They threw the deep post over the top of the crossing route to Jeremiah Smith. That's really the only time they did it all night. Miami was able to close the middle of the field and kind of keep Sayin on his heels in terms of knowing what coverage they were in and what look they were going to show. And I really thought that Miami executed a great game plan defensively in order to get after the quarterback and get off the field against Ohio State. Of course, the pick six was a game changer, right? That was the one that it put Miami up by 2 scores and really, really put a lot of pressure on Ohio State to try to catch up. Ole Miss. Ole Miss, when the game against Georgia was on script, okay? So what I mean by that was in that first half, when the game settled in, when Georgia started to run the football and do what they do, run an inside zone and duo and counter, and when Ole Miss got in, their spread stuff and tried to go quickly, and couldn't get short yardage situations. They couldn't get in third and manageable. They didn't have those high percentage completions. When the game was on schedule during the first half, Georgia was in control of the game. And then the scoop and score happened with Dalen Everett scooping the Q1 Lacey fumble. That's when I want to say a lot of people think that would be the nail in the coffin of that game. Obviously, it was a 9-point game at halftime. Anything close to being over, but I guarantee if you polled people watching that game at halftime, they would have told you Georgia is in complete control of this game. They're controlling the line of scrimmage on both sides. They just got a defensive touchdown, and Ole Miss, they are good on offense, but they're not good enough to outscore this Georgia team coming out in the second half who can run the ball. And then the game got off script a little bit, right? Going in the fourth quarter, Georgia's still up by 5, and you have the Super Mario drive from Trinidad Chambliss, where he has the 2 scrambles and finding of Q1 Lacey as a check down, and then he breaks the pocket to the right, he finds Wallace on the scramble drill, and then eventually Lacey runs it in and scores, and Ole Miss took the lead. And once the game got off script and Georgia was chasing Ole Miss's, for lack of a better phrase, his backyard football, then it was in Ole Miss's favor, right? And Ole Miss's ability to run the football for 3 to 4 yards a carry for the entire game, and Ole Miss's ability to get enough out of its D-line to disrupt Georgia's run game and make it a little inconsistent, all that stuff kind of meshed together, and it provided the recipe for Ole Miss to upset Georgia, right? I thought Ole Miss executed its back shoulder fades and that kind of thing to perfection against Georgia's man coverage. Now, I think some real questions in this game, right? You have strength on strength in Ole Miss's offense and Chambliss's ability to get the ball out quick, to not get sacked, right? Ole Miss played Georgia twice this year. I know they're not playing them this week, but they played Georgia twice in 8 quarters. They're still trying to get their first sack against Trinidad Chambliss. They have not sacked him. So Chambliss's ability to avoid pressure and get out of there, okay, and also to throw in the face of pressure, right? Chambliss was 9 of 12 in this game against pressure. He was 9 of 12 against Georgia against pressure, and it was like on fire anytime that Georgia sent 5 or more. And that's kind of the opposite of what Julian's saying, and his stats had shown going into the Miami game, right? Sayin had shown like all year, against Texas, against Penn State, against Indiana, when he got pressure and was pressured by the defense, his numbers fell off a cliff. Whereas Chambliss using this Georgia game as a sample size, he just skyrocketed when faced with pressure. So I think it's strength on strength in terms of Miami's ability to get after the quarterback and control the offensive line in the line of scrimmage versus Shamlis, his ability to get the ball out quick, to make plays off script, to be accurate throwing it downfield to Stribling and Wallace. I think it's strength on strength. So I think keys to the game. Does Miami have to play from behind? Think about it. Texas A&M, Ohio State, they haven't had to play from behind, right? The Texas A&M game was tied 3-3 for a century, it seemed like, and then Miami scored a touchdown in the fourth quarter. Miami's up 14-0 in the Cotton Bowl, and then they're up 17-14 or 17-7. Then they're up eventually 24-14. They never trailed, and so they can slow the game down. Carson Beck doesn't have to do anything spectacular. All he has to do is avoid pressure. Anytime that he doesn't trust what he's seeing, he did a good job of using his legs and getting out of trouble. He throws high percentage throws in quick game, and they get out of there with the win. Does Miami have to play from behind? Because if Miami has to play from behind, I don't think that's a good recipe for them. Because they have shown that they can be very impatient sometimes with a run game if they're not ahead. Okay? I thought in the Texas A&M game, they were very reluctant to commit to it fully. And then when they did in the fourth quarter, they won the game. So if they get behind, I'm curious as to, are they going to start chucking it all over the place and asking Carson Beck, to be Matthew Stafford or something and throw for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns to win this game and get into a shooting match with Shamlis and Ole Miss. I think that's a recipe for failure, and that's bad news for Miami if that happens, okay? Ole Miss's run game. Can they do what they did against Georgia? Can Lacey get you 22 for 98 and 2 touchdowns? Can they hold their own in that end? Can they match Miami in yards per carry like they did against Georgia? That remains to be seen. If they can, I believe, just like in the Sugar Bowl, that is going to allow Ole Miss to have the entire playbook at their disposal on every down. If they can run the football, if they can get in 2nd and 7, 2nd and 6, if they can get in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, then they can attack Miami's defense from all different ways, and they can slow that rush down. Don't forget about that third quarter and the early fourth quarter against Ohio State. When Ohio State started running the football, when they ditched their game plan of these big drop back passes and started running the Bo Jackson. I was like the most famous running back in Auburn history. He shares the name with Ohio State's running back, Bo Jackson. All right, when they started running him, that pass rush all of a sudden went away for Miami. It slowed down, and that's what happens when you have a decent running game. Those guys can't just get in a 9 technique and rush upfield. Okay, they have to play their gaps, and so I believe that kind of execution of the run game would be very, very big for Ole Miss in this. Okay, can they run the ball the way that they did? Can Lacey be tough to tackle the way he was against Georgia? And can that offensive line get some movement against this dominant Miami front? That'll be a big part of this. I mentioned Carson Beck having to do more. As Miami, is it possible they've sat around at the facility for a week and they've come up with, hey, we haven't scored enough points to beat a team like Ole Miss the last 2 weeks. We need to give him more to do. Is it possible they've done that? Is it possible that the Miami coaching staff, that Mario Cristobal, that Shannon Dawson, they believe in order to beat Ole Miss, they're going to have to outscore them. And that part of doing that is Carson Beck opening him up and unleashing him. It's kind of a double-edged blade there. It's because he's a talented guy. He's a lot of experience. He knows how to win. But also, he has a history of throwing the ball to the other team. And if you're Miami, You cannot turn the ball over in this game. Obviously, no team can afford to turn the ball over in football games and win. But I think specifically in this game, talking about Miami having to play from behind, if they have to play from behind, and Carson Beck has to throw that ball all over the field in order for them to try to keep up with Ole Miss, I think that's a recipe for bad stuff to happen from Miami. Does Ole Miss's D-line play like they did in New Orleans? Okay? Think about those big guys up front. 51, Harris. 52, Eccles. 4, Perkins. He's not a big guy, right? He's undersized. Those guys played outstanding against Georgia. I thought especially from about the midway of the second quarter on, Georgia's run game became very inconsistent because you had Ole Miss up front. They were winning one-on-one blocks. They were splitting double teams. They were, they were chasing stuff down. They were fitting the run in such a way and getting off of blocks and shedding blocks that Georgia went away from the run game. Georgia lost its confidence in the run game to an extent. Okay? Now, I think you could argue in that fourth quarter when they got down by 10 and started running Nate Frazier again, they started gashing Ole Miss again. Now, Ole Miss is in the 60s over the course of the season in run defense. But they've been different in this playoff, right? They have been different, albeit one of those games is against Tulane. But against Tulane and Georgia, they have been different up front, okay? They've done a lot better timely stuff in terms of stunting, in terms of twists up front, in terms of their guys' effort, okay? And their technique in the D-line has just been better than it was during the regular season. So, are they different? That's a wild card. Is their DL going to play like that? Because here's the thing. If they can slow down this Miami run game, if they can get Miami off the field and not allow Miami to drive the field and get in these short yardage situations in second and third manageable, and they force them to have to throw the ball, then, I mean, it's everything we've talked about, right? Of putting more on Carson Beck and putting more on that passing game if the run game is not there and if the run game is not sufficient to move the football and to score against Ole Miss. I've went back and forth on this game, okay? I really think if the game sticks to the script, Miami will win and cover. Miami will easily cover the 3.5 if this game sticks to the script. If they come out and Miami's clean, what I mean by that, they don't turn the football over. They don't have a lot of pre-snap penalties. They can allow Carson Beck to hit that quick game, those high percentage throws in timely situations and not have to throw the ball on third down a lot to move the sticks and to get touchdowns. If they can, on the other side, if they slow down Ole Miss's run game to the level that the stats show all season long, that the level that Ole Miss is going to run it and the level at which Miami is going to stop the run, if Miami pressures the quarterback like they have all season long, if this game is on script, Miami will win this game. I'm confident in that. They have the better team on the line of scrimmage. And in any of these instances, in any of these games, if you have the better team on both lines of scrimmage, you are usually the better football team. Now, what happens if the game goes off the rails? Okay? What happens if Miami has a timely turnover or two early? And what happens if the Ole Miss offense, which is considered probably, according to a lot of analytical stuff, like I mentioned Bill Conley's S&P Plus, they're the second best offense in the FBS. In terms of explosives, they're the second best offense. What happens if they can run the football early, they get some explosive plays distributing into Wallace early, and that Shamlis is on fire like he ended the Georgia game? You have maybe a 3 and out, maybe a turnover on downs, maybe a missed field goal attempt by Miami. All these things that could potentially happen that could lead to Ole Miss being ahead. That is the recipe for Ole Miss. Now, what I mean with the game going off the rails, let's say there's a lot of stuff where it breaks down on offense for Ole Miss, and Shamlis is left scrambling around with his eyes downfield, with his receivers doing the scramble drill. I don't think Miami wants that to happen. Okay, if you watch the Georgia film from last week, you know why they don't want that to happen. Okay, if the game goes off the rails, then that means Beck's going to have to be throwing a lot. They don't want to put him in that situation. All right, where he's got to win the game, where they have to put the team on his back, right? So I think if the game sticks to the script, Miami will win. If it goes off the rails and there are turnovers and there are penalties and there are shenanigans back and forth and there's lead changes, I think that favors Ole Miss based on what they've been through and their experience and based on what they just did against Georgia. Ole Miss is a complete vibes team right now. They are the vibes that are coming off of that team are unbelievable. They proved me wrong. I was completely wrong on Ole Miss and its playoff run. I thought without their head coach, I thought with 6 offensive coaches with one foot out the door at LSU trying to coach, I thought that the players would resent that. I thought that they would be lacking organization. I thought Pete Golden, being a first-time coach, coaching in these types of games, I thought it all was a recipe for, a shortcoming for Ole Miss. I was completely wrong. It's on the other end. I think they're more focused. I think Pete Golden has this team more locked in than Lane Kiffin ever did. And now Kiffin gets credit for building it, putting it all together. But I think right now they're more locked in than they've ever been. And I think the vibes off this team, chip on the shoulder is too cliche, right? I just think they're vibing as a team. They're feeling it, and I feel like when their quarterback goes, they go, and that guy is really good. And so I've went back and forth all week on this game, and a part of me thinks too, is Miami due for that Louisville game, for that SMU game, for that Syracuse game last year, for that Georgia Tech game a couple of years ago? Are they due for that clunker, right? They've been really clean so far in this playoff. But part of me thinks the odds say they're going to have a clunker at some point if they play all the way through this playoff. And if it's against Ole Miss, this team that has playing with so much confidence and their quarterback is on fire like he's playing on NBA Jam, I think that is not good for Miami. So, as against my better judgment, as to what the line of scrimmage situation is, I'm going to go with Ole Miss to win this game outright, not just cover the spread. I think Ole Miss beats Miami, and they go to play in the national championship in Miami and go ahead and get the Disney rights purchased and go into pre-production, assign a director, a script writer. Hey, you don't even need a script writer; it's already written, right? But I think Ole Miss, I think if you held me down to it, I think Ole Miss wins this game because of what they have going on right now as a team. So, and that brings us to Friday in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta in a rematch from October. There was an Alton Stadium in Eugene, Oregon, between the Indiana Hoosiers and the Oregon Ducks. So, this game is, we talked about in the Miami Ole Miss game, the Ole Miss offense versus the Miami defense, the strength on strength. I think this game is full strength on strength all the way across the board. Okay? Last week we talked about how Texas Tech and Oregon was kind of like that, right? They were kind of carbon copies of statistically the same, but Oregon and Texas Tech went about it a little bit differently, right? They both like to run the football. They both stop the run really well. And I kind of think this fits that same mold, except for, unfortunately for Oregon, you're playing maybe the most efficient offense in college football in Indiana. So I think Indiana's defensive game control, right? If you look throughout this year, if you look throughout Indiana's schedule, their game control and the way that their defense plays is kind of it's just off the charts. It's otherworldly in terms of how they beat teams and how they don't just beat them. I mean, they beat people to sleep. All right. They don't mess around. They don't play with their food. They don't really have those clunkers, right? I mean, if you look at what their defense has done this year, I mean, they gave up 24 points in the game at Penn State when they got behind and they rallied in that fourth quarter and won in State College. And then they gave up 20 to Oregon. But remember, 7 of those 20 were on a pick six that Mendoza threw in the fourth quarter. So they really gave up 13 as a defense. And after that, guys, they haven't given up more than 15 points all year. Okay. They got 15 to Iowa in a game and 2 of those were on a safety late. Okay. So they really gave up 13 to Iowa. They just haven't given up any points. And you can say what you want about their strength of schedule. We talked about that last week on the preview for the Alabama game. That they were in the mid to low 20s anywhere you looked in terms of their strength of record and strength of schedule. Their defense just shuts people down, and you saw it against Alabama last week. Like the D line is resetting the line of scrimmage. They're playing gap sound. They're playing heavy handed. The linebackers are run fitting. They are running sideline to sideline. They are making calls. They're communicating. The secondary is locked down. They know every concept and they know every route and how to play it. And they're driving on the ball and they suffocate the receivers. The pass rush gets after the quarterback. Like they are a machine on defense. And I think Oregon, if you look at, I think the Orange Bowl, if you really watched it and you go back and you watch the film, that game was a little misleading in terms of how much Oregon controlled the game. Oregon was not a very clean operation on offense. Just in the first half, they had 3 botched snaps. A couple of them were bad snaps. I think one of them, Dante Moore, just straight dropped. And they were living in 3rd and 15, 3rd and 20 against Texas Tech's defense. They could not run the ball. Okay, against Texas Tech, Oregon had 48 carries for 74 yards as an offense. Like they could not run the football. Now, what they could do was Dante Moore could lead that passing game, and he made plays with his feet, he made plays with his arm, and he really showed why NFL scouts have pushed him all the way to a guy that, hey, in 27 he might be a good prospect too. He's right up there with Mendoza now to be the first guy off the board next year if he wants to come out. So you have this generational talent at quarterback for Oregon. Can he overcome all this, right? On the other side, Oregon's run defense is just suffocating. That's what they do, right? Oregon stops the run. We saw it against Texas Tech. Texas Tech had controlled games all year, running the football with 8 and with 20 in that offense for Texas Tech, and they could not do anything against Oregon run the ball. We told you that in that one run that Texas Tech had in the first half, you had it was a 50-yard run, I believe, that the one kid broke from Texas Tech from back in their own end. But Texas Tech had 215 total yards, and as a team rushing, Texas Tech had 78 yards rushing on 30 attempts. So of those 78, 50 of them came on that one play where Oregon had the guy wrapped up in the backfield a couple times, and he got loose and ran to the other side around the left end and ran for 50 yards. So that shows you how dominant Oregon's run defense was, and is. They have NFL players up there. Okay, this is not your Oregon of 2014 or, uh, you know, even 2021, like when Dan Lanning first got there, 22. You have legitimate NFL players in the front seven. Okay, uh, you have guys that like Betcher, um, that they're just hard nosed football players, and they are going to run to the football. They're going to play technique. Lanning's defense, okay, he comes from that Kirby tree, from that Saban tree, if you will. Um, they're going to pressure. They're going to do the simulated pressures. They're going to disguise coverage, uh, and they're going to spill stuff, and they're going to force you to get around the edge and to run on their edges against guys that they have spilled the ball to. And I think that is going to be very difficult uh, for Indiana to have to deal with as well, right? It's been difficult for everybody up until this point. So the run defense for Oregon's really their strength. On offense, Indiana's a machine, right? If you look back, that first drive against Alabama in the Rose Bowl, Alabama got them a couple times on bringing pressure on first and third down, and they got to Mendoza. And then it was like on that next drive, they had already fixed it on the sideline, and they went right down the field. They ran first. They gave Mendoza high percentage throws. Now, I'll say this. I've talked a lot about the high percentage stuff with Carson Beck. It's a different deal with Mendoza, though. They are letting him throw the ball to those receivers, to Surratt, to Cooper, to 80, right? Those guys, they are going to throw the ball to them down the field and intermediately. They're not afraid to let him throw it. But they do it on opportunistic downs. They do it on first down. They do it on second and short, right? They're not afraid to turn Mendoza loose. And I'll say this about Mendoza, too. I think he's such a good prospect in one reason, because if you get in a defense and you show him what you're going to do, he's going to have an answer. He knows where the answers are. He's not going to be confused, right, by if you get in something and you play that defense. He's not going to be confused by that. And you saw it like against Alabama. I mean, such precision getting the ball out. I'm thinking of the one like smash concept where they're running the corner route and they got the comeback route underneath it by number one. And Alabama sends a pressure. They're playing man, and he knows right where he's going with the ball, throwing the corner out. I just thought he was so precise in that game, and that is who he is, right? That's not out of character. That's just who he is as a player. He's so good with his feet and staying in the pocket and having pocket presence, and then when things break down, he can use his feet to get out of trouble. I mean, I think he's a really good quarterback, and I think this is the quarterback matchup of this playoff. Mendoza versus Moore. Really, if you talk to NFL scouts, the top two guys in the draft, right? Now, it's an interesting thing to me. Coming off the heels of this game where Oregon beat Texas Tech and shut them out, and where Indiana destroyed and dismantled Alabama, nobody's talking about Oregon. Nobody. Indiana's favored by 3.5 in this game. It is a rematch of a game that was a close game the first time around in the regular season. Oregon is technically the more talented team in terms of recruiting. I know we talked about that in our open, about how once the blue chip ratio has kind of been redone with transfers factored in, that Indiana is, up there in terms of the most talented team. But in terms of just raw high school recruited talent, Oregon's built like an SEC team. Okay? They're going to run the football. They're going to stop the run. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to play a lot of man coverage. That's what they're going to do. Okay? They're built like an SEC team. Indiana is built like to me, they're built like like the national championship Georgia teams in like 21, especially, that relied heavily on running the football and and then running it some more, and then running it some more, and then booting, hitting you with hard play action, high percentage stuff, right? When you were trying to sell out to stop the run. They remind me of those Alabama teams, uh, probably really before uh, the kind of the Lane Kiffin revolution, where Alabama was a heavy zone team, a lot of pistol under Jim McElwain early on, where they're going to run zone, inside and outside zone. They're going to run duo, and they're going to lean on you and lean on you and lean on you, and they're going to play with 2 or 3 backs that are really good. And in that fourth quarter, the dam is going to break. That's what happened against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. They didn't want any more of that zone game uh, that Indiana had been running all day long, and the dam finally broke. And Indiana had 50 carries in that game, right? And Mendoza only threw it 16 times. So that's the type of game they want to play. So does Indiana have to play from behind? They haven't really had Penn State games. The only time they've had to do it. They have the confidence in saying, "Hey, if they look at the scoreboard and see they're down 10 or 14 or whatever, things that they can point to that Penn State game and say, hey, we've done this before. We know what to do. We know how to execute and how to come from behind." But that's it. They haven't had to play from behind. What do they do if they have to play from behind in this game? Can Oregon get a lead? And then I think Dante Moore putting the team on his back, because I think Indiana is going to at least limit the run to an extent where Oregon can't just lean on it to win the game. I think Dante Moore is going to have to put the team on his back at some point in order for Oregon to win this game. He is going to have to shine as the quarterback prospect in this draft class in order for Oregon to win this game. Okay? Um, Now, I think you could look at the film and say he kind of did that last week to an extent, but he didn't have to score hardly any points doing it because his defense shut Texas Tech out. So I think when you look at that, like, how much can he do that? Because Indiana can score. Indiana can score when they need to, when they want to. So I think he's going to need more than 23 points to win this game. Okay? Can he put the team on his back and do it? And I think, too, this is a big game for Dan Lanning's legacy. Okay? Very young. Obviously, he's very young into this. He's got Oregon. I mean, the success he's had at Oregon, uh, I think people expected him to be good, but I don't know if they really expected him to get at this level of winning and stay there like he has. And so I think this is big for him, right? 2 years ago, they beat everybody except Washington, and they lost to them twice, and they lost to them in a rematch. And they were very talented. They were loaded that year, and they couldn't get it done. Okay. Last year, you went 13-0, won the Big Ten, and then you got smoked, and that game was over in the Rose Bowl. It was over in the first quarter against Ohio State. So now you come back this year, you get this rematch in the Final Four with Indiana, and nobody's talking about you. Nobody expects you to win. Indiana is the darling of college football. They're the favorite. They're also like the Cinderella. They're also the the best character in Signetti. You've got Mendoza, the Heisman winner, who has this different personality, right? All these things. Nobody's really talking about Oregon. And that can be an edge for them, okay, if they use it. And I know Dan Lennon, he comes from that Kirby Smart school of motivation. Like, if they win this game, I can't wait to see the video, like, whatever, next Monday or Tuesday that comes out, their edit and their highlight reel that Oregon football puts out for this, because Lannon's just going to be on a different freaking level in that if they win this game. So I really do think it comes down to, can Oregon get a lead? And can Dante Moore put this team on his back and win? Because I think Indiana is a complete team. I think they can beat you in so many different ways. They can beat you 3-0. I think they can beat you 41-38. I think they can beat you with with Black and Hemby running the ball 60 times, I think they can beat you with Mendoza throwing, open Surratt and Cooper and those guys the whole game. I think they can beat you doing that. And so Oregon, though, I think they have to win this game a certain way. I think they have to win. I think they have to win a game in which Dante Moore carries this team and throws the football. I think they do have to be able to run it to, a respectable level. But I don't think they're going to run the ball for 200 yards in this game. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think Moore has to be special. He has to be elite. Now, with all that being said, I think Indiana's going to have to play an uncharacteristic game to lose. Okay? I think that they're going to have to play a game that, like the Penn State, like Iowa earlier this year, where they're not as sharp and they let Oregon hang around, and they let Oregon do more than hang around. They let Oregon get a lead, and they have to play catch up, right? I think that's the recipe here. But I think ultimately, I think Indiana is built so well, and I think they are the lines of scrimmage. I think all around receiver play. I think their defensive line. I think the defensive front seven and the back end are so machine like that, like I said, they can beat you in so many different ways. I think that outweighs the possibility of them not showing up in this game, and not being as sharp as they can be. And I like Indiana to win and cover the 3.5 in this game. That would set us up for an Indiana Ole Miss national championship in Miami if that were true, right? Two powerhouses, the Hoosiers and the Rebs. I think they would probably those two fan bases would definitely overtake South Florida if that were the case. So, with one looking for his first ever natty and the other one looking for the first one since the Kennedy administration. So, guys, on that note, we're going to kind of wrap things up here. Once again, reach out to us, interact with the show, leave comments on our YouTube page, subscribe to the show, hit that like button. Follow us on Twitter at Joey Browning CFB. Follow us on TikTok at Joey Browning CFB. We're going to be putting out all kinds of X and O contents on our YouTube as well as TikTok and Twitter. We already have. Go check it out. And we're going to be putting out a lot more. Don't forget, tomorrow night, as soon as, or if you're watching this on Thursday morning, okay, Thursday afternoon, on Thursday night, as soon as the Fiesta Bowl's over, we're going to go live on YouTube and give our instant reaction. And then on Friday night, as soon as the Peach Bowl's over, we'll go live on YouTube and do the same thing with our instant reaction. All right, guys, looking forward to these games. I cannot wait to see how things play out. And the unknown in this Final Four is kind of fascinating to me in terms of a college football standpoint. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in this sport specifically. So, guys, thanks for joining us. Enjoy these two games, and we'll see you as soon as that Fiesta Bowl goes.